Good morning, everyone. My name is Will Marie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be answering questions as we go along, and you can type them in the question box. If you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email them to me, and I will forward them to the appropriate person that can answer them. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under Professional Development. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel.
Good morning, everyone. And it's that time of year where things move very rapidly. So Sheila is going to give you an overview of the actions of the Appropriations Committee as of yesterday, Wednesday, on the proposed 2023-2025 state budget. In the meantime, the Appropriations Committee is meeting again today to consider 42 specific bills, some of which have substitute language that is being considered, which we have not yet seen the substitute language. The Appropriations Committee convened at 10 this morning. They are currently caucusing, and they expect to come back in, work through a number of the bills until 3 this afternoon, and then reconvene tomorrow. Tomorrow is their deadline. They have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to take action on any of the bills before them. Otherwise, those bills are considered dead. But as we know in the legislative process, nothing is ever dead until midnight on the last day of the legislative session. Some of that language, even if it's not acted upon by the committee, can certainly come back as included in a larger piece of legislation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila.
Good morning, everyone. So yes, Appropriations Committee has adopted a budget. Just a little on process, as you read there. The governor presented his budget to the legislature as a whole in February. And at that point, it becomes the responsibility of the Appropriations Committee to, as I say here, public hearings, agency briefings, work sessions, and subcommittee meetings. From there, we testified on behalf of CABE, or we had a member testify. I believe it was Tony who may have testified, and most likely Liz testified as well. We have informal meetings with legislators in terms of, is this going to be considered? We really need that to be considered. These bills have been through the Education Committee process as well, the ones that affect the education workings of the legislature. And then the budget comes out as it did this week. So what you will read here is the ECS formula in box there. There are increases in fiscal year 24 and 25. That's not, and then the overfunded section is the 2017 agreement from the legislature, that bipartisan 2017 agreement, 10-year program for phasing in and phasing out. This allows those districts that were overfunded to be held harmless again, continuing to be held harmless. And then again, the formula is part of that agreement. Above there, it does say, thank you, here, well, yeah, either way. There is a section on education finance reform. There is a bill, 5003, which deals with speeding up the 2017 agreement from the 10 years, which will end in 2028 to ending in 2025. So speeding up the payments to districts that are underfunded. And holding harmless the districts that would be being phased out for their financial payments. So the full amount of that funding exceeds 150, but there is an attempt to do something at 150 million. This, again, as Patrice said, is a work in progress. We're hoping to see more money come forward in that respect. Moving down. Okay. The other pieces of the budget that are included in In there are money for charter schools, $3 million for charter schools. They should have access to it as well, though, too. There is $3 million, I'm sorry, 3 new schools, Norwalk, Middletown, and New Haven, charter schools that would be receiving funding from the legislature. There was a, oh great, thank you, Gail. There was an amendment offered at the legislature in the Appropriations Committee to include the Danbury charter school. And that amendment offered by a former school board member, new representative, Rachel Chileski, was defeated because typically in most years recently, there have not been amendments on the committee floor. So it was not offered in good stead, and therefore it was defeated. There are a number of legislators that support charter schools being public schools, publicly chartered. So there is support on the Democratic side, and this was a tough vote for many of the legislators to oppose that amendment. Going on, there is money for aspiring educators, which is a scholarship program for diversifying the education workforce in the state of Connecticut. Senator Doug McCarthy has been dogged about making sure this program starts to move along and money's move forward. It's not just setting it up, it's funding it. And there is money for promotion and marketing of teachers, which is new. Certainly there are programs in place we heard about for firefighters and police officers to engage people to enter the profession. Here we have a program for marketing of teachers. Financial transparency. This is $250 million in each of the fiscal years.
250,000.
250,000. I'm sorry, they're different commas missing there, for looking into school districts and their budgeting of their budgets. So it's a auditing process. There is special ed excess costs. There was a reduction. So that's a very small negative number there in front of the 23. I'm sorry, it's a very small negative sign or minus sign in front of the 23 million. The special ed excess cost grant has changed in the way in which it's dispersed. It's still 4.5 times your average per pupil expenditure. If your district, well, I won't go into the whole litany of that, but there are tiered programs for depending on the wealth of your district. So therefore, this money reflects the way in which that tier process works and what the monies would need to be made available. We certainly know, well, I'll get into another bill that's moving forward as well. I'm going to stop there for appropriations and move into some bills for appropriations, and I'll go back to the Finance Committee. I think that's a better way to do things. So today, as Patrice mentioned, the Appropriations Committee will be reviewing 42 bills, which are the workings of the budget. So these are bills that support the budget. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bills of the 42 that really impact education. The first bill is Senate Bill 1216, an act concerning funding for student meals. This is a study bill to look at the process of fully funding student meals going forward. At the moment, it's a study. There was no mention of meals in this budget for going forward. There still is negotiations going on whether or not there could be funding. It may not come to every district. There are a number of ways in which they're still talking about this issue, so it's not dead. There is another bill, 1218, Senate Bill 1218, which makes some changes to the Teachers Retirement Board for CERC, which is a research arm and education research center. Senate Bill 1219, again, another study which would fully fund excess cost, which again is something that Senator Looney, who we honored earlier this, I guess last month, was helpful in trying to work towards more funding for districts for special education. So we expect that there may still be some movement on that issue. There is a bill, so House Bill 6901, an act concerning a student loan reimbursement program for certain professionals. Of those certain professionals are nurses, are teachers. I believe there were a couple others mentioned, but teachers are in there. What this program will look like, we don't know at the moment, because the action that's proposed in the committee that today would be JFS, and that S is substitute language, and we don't have a copy of that at this moment. There's money for charter school approval process, setting up a grant account, and not allowing the State Board of Ed to approve any more than 2 new applications for charter schools a year. And that's Senate Bill 1096, which went through the Education Committee and had a public hearing. And then Senate Bill 1199, which is an act concerning equity in education. It's allowing a student to work while earning a degree in terms of working in the school system. Accountability for your diversity plans. If in that accountability, they would be withholding ECS if your plans aren't coming to fruition or being worked on. There's money in there for the Aspire program, scholarship program. They're setting up a opportunity for professors at the higher ed level to become permitted, to become certified at the high school level. There is in there cursive and world languages to be a part of the K-8 model curriculum. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading my own handwriting. Repayment, and then if you need to repay loans if you received loans, if you left the teaching profession. In terms of the last 2, there is one 6881, which is various revisions, which is always a pretty good catch-all bill. But 6881 deals with paraprofessionals and their professional development, having the paraeducators have an opportunity to review the IEP with the supervisor, a grant program for paraeducators, supplementing teachers and paraeducator salaries, establishing a minimum salary for teachers and paraeducators, and then have an opportunity to provide municipal employee health insurance plan for paying employee contributions to the retirement benefits. So that is in there as 6881. There is substitute language that will be heard, that will be brought out in committee. So as much as I've said what's in it now, some of that could be taken out. And the last bill that the Appropriations Committee will be hearing that we'll be voting on that involves education is 6884, an act concerning recruitment, retention, and enhancement of the teaching profession. This is a pretty big bill in terms of the teaching profession as a whole. It would establish a minimum salary at 4 times the poverty level, allow a $500 credit against the income tax, COVID service benefit enhancement towards retirement. There are sections in there, as I think we talked about last week, on Board of Ed. Let me get to the point here. removing the designated Board of Ed member to conduct termination hearings, removes the 3-person arbitration panel. You have to be age 5 to enroll in kindergarten. So there are a number in here, and there's also a Board of Ed Adopt Educator Bill of Rights. So we will continue to see how that bill moves forward. At the moment, it's a JF, so most of that would be moving forward at this point. And that's the Appropriations Committee. So as she said, it's actually very nice to know that they're ending at 3 versus going till all hours and having a deadline there. So in terms of the Finance Committee, which met yesterday evening, as you read there, they have made $10 million in bonding for matching fund grants for the federal program for purchasing or leasing of zero-emission electric buses or charging infrastructure. DPH has money involved there for 5.5 for water bottle filling stations in schools. And SDE has, and I neglected to put the dollar amounts there, but there's $7 million for this, for the grant and aid to Promise program. There's $5 million for the assisting charter schools with capital expenses. And there is $5 million for grants to target districts for alterations, repairs, improvements, technology, and equipment for the low performing schools. There is, in terms of more supporting data from the Finance Committee, the Finance Committee is responsible for moving forward the school funding, school building grants. There will be grant applications made as of June 1, 2022. It increases the reimbursement rate. Under the current law, that range is 20 to 80 when the applicant can show a new construction is less expensive than a renovation, extension, or major alteration. This would change the reimbursement rate for new construction from 10 to 70 to 10 to 80%. It would discontinue the practice of deducting federal funds received for the project from the project costs before calculating the state reimbursement grant, and it would allow any town rather than only priority school districts to use federal funds to finance school building projects, which will be considered as part or all of the town's local share. And I think there were some deductions in the bonding process that I did want to talk to you about. Here, right here. Okay, so there is a reduction in alliance districts for improvements to school buildings of about $12 million. And then there is, that's the one I want to tell you. Okay, that's it. That's a lot. Happy to take also, or no, there was money for HVAC as well. $150 million. And then there's money for school building projects of $250 million. So, sorry. What can I, how can I help?
Marie, do we have questions?
No questions at this time.
Well, we will take the appropriate educators pause and see if people have questions. If you are interested in listening to any of the discussion in the Appropriations Committee, the meeting is being covered on CTN.
Okay, we've got a couple questions coming in. First one is, sorry if I missed it, but was there an increase money for school security?
Let me see. I may, buildings and grounds including buildings and grounds including utilities. School security, yes, there was $10 million in both years. And that is under the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. And that's typically been the amount that's come forward year after year.
Okay, and Patrice, I don't know if you already answered this, but there's another question saying, how can we follow what appropriations decides over the next 24 hours?
So you can do it live. You can tune into CTN, and the Appropriations Committee meeting today and tomorrow will both be covered on CTN. And if you don't have time to do that, we will be getting out an advocacy highlights as soon as they have taken final action. So it could be that they go right to their deadline of 5 o'clock tomorrow, in which case we'd get something out first thing Monday morning.
Right. The annoying part of this process is that while they have 42 bills, they won't necessarily take those 42 bills in the order in which the agenda has them. You really have to have time on your hands to follow along.
Be assured we will be following along.
That's my job.
And the real challenge is going through what the substitute language is to see what changes are being made from what was originally in the legislation.
There is also an opportunity that if both sides, Democrats and Republicans, agree on a piece of legislation and they put it on consent, there will be no debate on the issue, which will move the agenda along. Again, I still expect they'll go to tomorrow to do some of this work as well, because some of these caucuses can be a little long.
Other questions?
Yes. The question is, any update on the service time during COVID legislation?
Well, Murray, we had trouble
about
hearing you.
COVID.
Sorry. Okay. Any update on the service time during COVID legislation?
That is still a part of the bill. I don't know if, and that bill did not say that they would be looking at substitute language, which is a good time to mention the phrase work in progress. So as much as there are bills on the agenda that say that they will be offered JFSing, the action they will be taking is JFSing, joint favorable substitute meaning that the bill as it's before them they will be making changes to and voting on that day, today. But there's also an option to say, we're not going to make any changes to this bill as it appears to you, but it's a work in progress. So don't expect that when you see it on the floor that it's going to be the way it appears here. So that phrase has been utilized
Constantly.
more this year and in the ensuing years, it seems to me, than ever. I don't know, maybe it's because they're all back together again and they want to, I don't know.
It also can be that individual bills that you see reported out of the committee may not be acted upon as a standalone bill. That same language or a variation on that language could end up incorporated into another piece of legislation.
Yeah, there were 2 bills. There were 3 bills before the Education Committee that were referred to the Education Committee. So if you think of a bill on student transportation, it may originate in the Transportation Committee, but it has some cognizance over the education process, obviously. So it will have a public hearing in transportation, it will be voted out of committee, and then it will be referred to the floor, let's say. Therefore, then the leadership then makes a referral back to the Education Committee for them to take a vote on it. It doesn't need another public hearing. So that is what happened this Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday this week. The Education Committee had 3 bills before them. One of them was on technical schools and promoting firefighter training schools. There was another bill that, while it was on the agenda, did not get brought to a vote, and that was on allowing retired police officers to carry while in schools, carry a weapon while in schools. that bill did not move forward. Now, that doesn't mean that concept is dead, but that bill didn't move forward.
And I just checked, and the Appropriations Committee 1-hour caucus is clearly going into overtime because they're not yet back in.
Our next question is school lunch being funded 100% along the lines of House Bill 5003?
School lunch isn't in 5003. That's really dealing with ECS and the 10-year commitment that the legislature made and speeding up that process. There were two bills. One was a Senate Bill 929, and the other bill is the one I mentioned to you that's in the committee today, which is so the 929 is the funded. Yeah, here it is, student meals. 1216 is the study it. 929 is, I think, still moving along. Maybe not, because it must have been, it's probably on the floor. But 1216 has made it through the committee process. So things can, it's moving along in the process. The bill is still out there to be debated, but I would think at some point 929 and 1216 will come together.
But right now, school meals are only fully funded through the end of this school year.
Yes, only this year.
That's all that's passed so far.
Right.
So our next question is, has there been any decision about the state funding of magnet schools with funds for those students still going to the sending district?
That's in 5003.
Yes, that's part of the 6 different ways in which they're dismantling the 11 different ways we fund education.
So no decision yet. That legislation is still pending.
There are no other questions at this time, but we'll give it a moment.
Great.
There's still no other questions.
All right. I just want to mention too, I mentioned the last time I was before you all that, or a version of you all, that if anybody wanted to do a training with me, and I will do it, I won't have to do it one-on-one, on how to understand the state website, where to find substitute language, what's a file copy. And then of course there's tons of different ways in which things appear on calendars and so forth. So I'm happy to do that. Maybe just I can do that maybe even next week for that matter. It's an interesting process in terms of, I don't think it's set up that hard in terms of trying to get through the website.
So with that, we will continue to stay in touch. Watch for advocacy highlights that will summarize the actions of the Appropriations Committee over the next 36 hours, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
And advocate, talk to your members that serve on the Appropriations Committee, because the more that we hear that you've talked with them and let us know that you've done that, the better that relationship goes for all of us. Even if it's to say, if you're going to study student meals, I'll tell you how it's working in my district. If you're going to study special ed, I'll tell you how it's working in my district. I can be that study for you. So, reach out. Thank you.